a great pleasure to introduce Stefanie Naumann, and now she will have her voice.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Dobry wieczór in Polish. Are there any people here of Polish descent? Could you raise your hand? Okay, quite a few. And how many of you knew my grandfather, Tadeusz Haska? Quite a few, that's great. And I'm glad that Beata introduced our honored guests, the Wodeckis, because without them, this couldn't have happened. And I'd like to also recognize one other distinguished guest, Dr. Jan Belza, who is a survivor of the Warsaw Uprising. So I'm very honored to have Dr. Belza in particular here, and if I say anything historically inaccurate, you'll correct me, I hope. So I'm very excited to be here to talk about my grandfather's life story, and I'd like to start by showing you the book trailer.
Orphaned in Poland at the age of 13, Tadeusz Ted Haska survived World War II on the run, narrowly evading the Nazis every step of the way. After the war, Ted daringly escaped a Soviet secret police jail and fled to Sweden, where he successfully launched an elaborate plan to smuggle his wife from Poland, in a coffin no less, on an all-male naval ship. 67 years later, in America, Ted sat down to write his story. In 2017, 5 years after his death, author Stefanie Naumann discovered her grandfather's unfinished manuscript and recorded video accounts of his experience. How Languages Saved Me, a Polish story of survival, is rich in detail and emotional depth. A harrowing tale of Ted's clever use of 9 languages to evade the forces that sought to crush his will. They did not succeed.
I say secret police, everybody knew that he was from the Department of Security.
Okay, so the question that I get asked the most when people find out about this book is, how did this book come about? So as we saw in the trailer, my grandfather, Tadeusz Haska, started writing the book before he passed away. I grew up as a young girl going to family gatherings and social events where all of his friends were there, and I noticed at these parties that a small crowd would gather and he would be in a corner somewhere and people would say, tell us more, what else happened in Poland, and how did you escape, and what happened after the war? And as a young girl, I wasn't really interested in history, unfortunately, as I am now, but I knew it was an important story because I kept hearing as a kid all of these people say, you have to publish this book. This is not just for your family, this is something that the world needs to hear as well. So that told me that even though I didn't know much about history at the time, I knew it was an important story. He started writing his book in the 1990s and did not quite finish the book at the time of his passing in 2012. So a few years after his death, I was going through the garage. I found boxes and boxes of all of these audio recordings and video recordings and letters and journals and personal diaries, all of him talking about his life. Many times he was interviewed about his life on audio and video, so I was just so excited because I thought, I have enough information in these boxes to fulfill his dream of publishing his story. So I thought, I really can do it. There's enough here to finish. He started it, and I'm going to finish it. So that was really exciting. It was almost like putting together pieces in a puzzle. I'd be watching a video, and it would be missing some detail that I really needed to know for the book, and I'd be really disappointed, but I'd open another box, and I'd find an audio recording where he answers exactly the question I was looking for. I can remember one video in particular. My my grandfather was telling the story of his arrest by the Soviet secret police. He went into great detail about how this happened and all of the circumstances, and then he says, "And then I escaped in a dramatic way." And then he moved on to the next story. So I was so disappointed. I thought, I need to know how you got out of this jail. And my husband and I were sitting at the edge of our seat wanting to know what happened. And a week later, I opened another box, and I find the rest of the story on audio recordings. So I finally was able to put the pieces together. The book also came about with a lot of research. I contacted researchers in Poland. They helped me to verify events, to verify locations, names of people, even the pronunciation and spelling of Polish words. I'm just so amazed by the generosity of the Polish people. Complete strangers, people I've never met before in Poland, helped me without accepting anything from me in return, translating documents, all kinds of things. I was able to connect with people that knew my grandfather. I met the children of the Swedish family who helped my grandparents when they were refugees in Sweden. These people are now in their 80s, and the daughter in particular I've gotten close to, and she provided me with a whole nother set of audio recordings of her interviewing my grandfather about his life. So it was another piece of the puzzle, so very special to me. I also was able to connect with the daughter of my grandfather's high school girlfriend in Poland. So that was great. I got to find out about the early years and corroborate some of the things that were in his story as well. More recently, I contacted a researcher in Poland, and he said, you know, there are people in this small town that knew your grandfather. You should call them. And so I called this woman, and she said, in 1945, your grandfather officiated at my wedding with my husband. He was trying to set up the government in Darwovo, and he married us. And so that was amazing. And I also connected, that same Polish researcher told me there's a published diary of a woman, Emilia Laszyńska, and she mentions your grandfather in this published diary. She died at about the age of 100, and I looked at the diary, and he translated the pages that I needed, and she mentions his whole arrest by the secret police and how she was working with him at the time and how he was able to escape. So that was just another piece to the puzzle as well, all of that research. I'd like now to talk about some of the different parts of the story in the book, give you a few teasers. I won't give everything away, it's in the book, but I'll give you some teasers. My grandfather was born in 1919 in Mikołajki, Poland. His brother was born 1 year later, Antoni. So if my grandfather had been alive today, he would have been 100. He talked about those years as being very good. He was very close with his parents. His parents owned a cheese business, a dairy business where they specialized in cheese. As he told me, it was a very profitable business. He said that at regular intervals, my grandfather's father would travel with an entire train cart full of cheese at regular intervals to Warsaw and Berlin and sell this cheese, and was very profitable. They had a nice, good life. My grandfather and his brother were active with the church. They were altar servers from a very young age, and he talked about how that was one of his favorite memories of being that age as a young boy. Everything changed for this family, however, when my grandfather was the age of 12 and his brother was 11. By that time, their 5 younger siblings had all died of childhood disease. Their father died of a stomach ulcer. So the family's cheese business really had some trouble. The mother was in charge of the business, but they found that the local farmers no longer wanted to do business when they found out that a woman was in charge. The Great Depression was also going on, not just in the US, but in Poland, across the world, and so the banks began to call back loans. My grandfather's dad had co-signed these loans with these local farmers, so Now that he was gone, my grandfather's mother was expected to pay this money back. She obviously couldn't do it, so the family really lost everything. They had to move to a one-room apartment, and even as small boys, they had to help their mother make ends meet. The summer after their father died, they were working at 2 separate farms, tutoring children. They were helping kids who didn't apply themselves during the school year, so during the summer they needed some tutoring. When the 2 boys returned back from the summer being over, they returned to their village to find the neighbors there telling them, your mother has died over the summer. So they became orphans at the ages of 13 and 12. They were very determined not to tell anyone. They were worried that they would be separated. So only one teacher and principal eventually figured out that these boys are living alone, they're orphans. She helped them by giving them some free tuition. The church gave them some free meals in exchange for being altar servers, and they lived alone completely all through high school in this one-room apartment. By the end of high school, they had burned all of their furniture to keep warm. My grandfather talks about how he was so excited to go to University of Poznan. He had a full scholarship. He no longer had to worry about room and board. Tuition was covered. He was so smart. He had a full scholarship. Everything was taken care of. First year of college went great. He was studying to be a teacher of Polish. Everything changed when he showed up for the second year of university. So this is fresh in my husband and I's minds because we just took our daughter to start her second year of university. So I can't imagine if what happened to my grandfather would happen to her on her first day. So what happened September 1st, 1939? Right. World War II, Germany invaded Poland. That's right. So the book contains all kinds of stories about the adversities my grandfather had to deal with in the war and how he survived. Let's listen to a short account of Ted's first encounter with a Nazi soldier.
First of all, Warsaw was already taken by Germans. So all 3 of us decided to walk back to Poznan, that is to the university town. And we started to walk on the main highway. But this highway now was full of German tanks, German trucks. So it was not very pleasant situation. So when we reached one town, when walking back toward west, and we walked on the sidewalk, and there were 3 or 4 German, I don't know, officers or soldiers, and they ordered us away from the sidewalk. We didn't understand any German at that time, but we understood what they meant, because they, with rifles, they right away pushed us away from the sidewalk, and one of them asked me directly, ordered me to move away from the sidewalk. And I, in my lack of understanding German problem, I answered him in German. Ich verstehe nicht Deutsch. I don't understand German. But this, I didn't know anymore. But this was well pronounced, that means pronunciation was fine. And he felt that I was a Polish who was, well, nationalist or, so he said, I will kill you. And he grabbed his pistol, but in the meantime I disappeared in a door that led to another yard and then another garden or something. And he probably gave up because they disappeared. They had to move forward, so I was saved at the time. But then I thought to myself, don't open your mouth. Unnecessarily.
So that's one of the secrets behind the title of the book. The title of the book is How Languages Saved Me, but there were some occasions that languages got Tadeusz into trouble, and that was one of them. There were several occasions like that. So languages were a big reason how Tadeusz survived before, during, and after World War II. During the war, he did things like translating job instructions to French prisoners of war. He translated newspapers. You have to remember, these Polish farmers were getting newspapers that were no longer in Polish, so they needed to know what was going on. A war was happening, and everything was in German. The radio was in German, the newspaper was in German, so my grandfather quickly learned German, and that's one way he was able to survive, translating. Other ways he was able to survive, always staying on the run. He said he was like a rabbit, running from hole to hole. He said sometimes it was safer to be in the country where there was plenty of food available. Other times it was better to be in the city. He also made sure never to be on any kind of list. So we know that the Germans were very good at list taking even before the war, and so he knew that they wanted to keep track of who you were, what was your occupation, where were you from, your nationality. He decided if he found out tomorrow was going to be list day, it was time to move on. So he was always staying on the run. Another way he stayed alive was removing his eyeglasses. Who can tell us why he would do that?
You look educated person.
You look like what?
You look like educated person.
Exactly. He looked like an educated person. So when anyone was looking, he had to make sure that the glasses were off, because the Nazis were worried that if Poles were to become educated, if they were able to read, they would be able to rise up and challenge what the Nazis had planned. So that was something he did during the war. He also became good at impersonating a German on occasion when necessary. The book has a lot of stories about how he survived. After the war, life got better for Tadeusz. He met my grandmother, Jadwiga. They lived in this beautiful home. I was able to see this home when I went to Poland with him in 1992. It was a very large, beautiful home. They lived in the coastal town of Darłowo, which was largely undamaged by any Nazi or Soviet war actions. So he said it was a really pleasant place to live. They had an ideal life for a short time. He was a teacher. He was also helping to set up the government after the war. And so one day, his friends encouraged him to run for political office against his wife's wishes. So if you remember, in January 1946, there were supposed to be these free and unfettered elections taking place in Poland. Poles were finally supposed to be able to decide if they could be a free, independent Poland or not. But if you remember, the communists had other ideas, and I think they figured that if my grandfather was running on the democracy ticket, if they could put him in jail, who's going to vote for a guy in jail? So I think that's what they were thinking. When you read the book, you'll find out exactly how he escaped from jail, but I'd like you to hear a little bit about how he got into jail.
Started by asking me if I owned, before the war, any factory, or if I were a capitalist, if I had a large estate, agricultural estate, if I was a banker, if I was, in other words, a capitalist. I answered him, no. I am a working person. I am a teacher. And he said, then, why are you on the other side of the barrier? Why are you not with us? You are one of us. You should be on our side, on the side of the workers. And what he meant by this, on the side of the Communist Party. And I said, I'm not going to change my affiliation, political affiliation, because I want Poland to be a Poland, not a Soviet Republic. And he was very angry with me, and he said he is going to for dinner to a restaurant, and when he comes back, he will continue the conversation. And in the meantime, he opened a door in the floor. How to call the door in the floor? Yeah. He opened and pushed me, and I found myself in a cellar. And the worst thing was that it was almost, well, halfway to my knees of water. And it was so low that I could not stand. I had to be in a position of, well, not able to sit because there was nothing to sit, not able to stand because it was too low, and it was very uncomfortable. The whole world crumbled. I was lucky that I was able to escape in a very dramatic way, but I had to change completely my life.
He did get into a little trouble, though, with his knowledge of languages and survived an attack on his life, both in Sweden and later in New York City, when he ended up speaking to some coworkers that he found out were communists. So the book has a great story about how he concocted this elaborate plan to return to Poland to save my grandmother. Because remember, he escaped to Sweden, but she's still there. He can't go back because he escaped illegally. So he had to have this elaborate plan that took months to go through, and finally was able to smuggle her in a coffin on an all-mail ship from Poland to Sweden. They got to Sweden. My grandmother started working at a china factory. She was painting china there. And life was pretty good for a little bit, but my grandmother began having terrible nightmares. She would wake up in the middle of the night screaming, thinking that my grandfather was once again being arrested. So my grandfather decided that they should probably immigrate to the United States. My grandmother thought, we're just not far enough away from the people that want to hurt you. I'm just going to keep having these nightmares. We need to go farther away. And so that was really the motivation for coming to the United States. My mother, Christine, was born soon after they arrived in New York. So how did they end up in California from New York? Oops, a little bit too far. My grandfather was working for a Polish fraternal organization in New York City, and one day was walking past his boss's office and noticed a piece of paper on the desk. The boss wasn't there. He picked it up and it said, this is an advertisement for a teacher of Polish in Monterey, California at the Army Language School. So he thought, oh, this would be great. I don't have to be a baker anymore. I don't have to be insurance anymore. I can do what I want to do, teach Polish. He was really excited about that. He thought, my boss is going to tell me about this. So he wrote down on a piece of paper about the job, put it in his pocket, and just waited. The boss never told him about the job. The boss did not want him to take the job. My grandfather applied for the job, got the job, and went back to tell his boss about it. The boss said, you don't want to go to California. He said, New York is America, America is New York. In California, there are wild savages jumping from tree to tree. They're not really Americans out there. So fortunately, my grandfather didn't listen to this, and he moved to Monterey, where he taught at what is now known as the Defense Language Institute for 35 years. I like to think that even though my grandfather didn't achieve his dream of personally being in Poland and being a part of Polish parliament, getting to see it become independent, I think indirectly he had even more of an impact, because for 35 years he taught American military personnel Polish. So they spread democracy by teaching Polish, by using their Polish, all over Eastern Europe. So I think my grandfather had even more of an impact by staying in the United States and teaching Polish. I wanted to mention he did earn his PhD in his 9th language, which was English, from UC Berkeley. And one of the highlights for him later in life that he told me was when my mother, Christine, went to go meet Lech Wałęsa, former Polish president and, as you know, leader of the Solidarity movement. She was able to speak at Polish parliament on behalf of my grandfather. She did this as part of her job. But my grandfather always felt that that was a way of his life really coming full circle, because he wasn't able to be elected to Polish parliament, but here's his daughter being able to speak many years later on his behalf at Polish parliament. Okay, before I take some questions, I would like to talk about some takeaways that I got from this story. The first one is perseverance. I think it's hard to hear a story like this and not think about perseverance. I hope that my grandfather's story inspires you when you think about all the adversities he had to overcome, and we think about our own lives and the challenges that we have, and if he can overcome some of these, maybe we can too. Another takeaway from the book is languages. Languages, learning more than one language is more important than ever before. It's a huge advantage in today's workplace. I tell my students, it'll give you such an advantage if you know more than one language. Whether it's communicating with coworkers in another country over teleconference or clients, customers, it really gives you an edge in the workplace knowing more than one language. And technology has made it even more easy today than it used to be. I'm using an app on my cell phone to relearn Polish. I used to know Polish, I'm trying to get it back. And so the app on my phone is completely free, doesn't cost anything, so there's no excuse why I can't learn another language. And finally, eyewitness accounts are critical to learning from history. There are fewer and fewer people alive today that remember this period, lived through this period, especially World War II Poland. So if we don't record this and preserve it, it's hard to learn from it. A lot of young people are not even aware of a lot of these events. So I encourage you to record your family's history, whatever that is. Every family has an important history. It doesn't have to be something formal like hiring a videographer. You could even just sit down with the oldest relative in your family and hit the record button on your cell phone and see what happens, take it from there. I think it's interesting that we have this trend now where people are fascinated with ancestry websites and genealogy and DNA, and I like all those things too, but we can't forget that our older relatives that are still with us have a lot to tell, and so it's important to get their story down while we still can and learn from them. I want to thank you for your interest in Tadeusz's story. My book is coming out on Tuesday, Amazon and Barnes & Noble, but today I have copies for you at the Seaside Library. I also want to mention that my website does have some other videos in addition to the ones that you saw today if you're interested, and I hope you'll keep in touch with me by signing up for my email list here. I'd like to open it up for questions now. Does anyone have any questions? Dan?
What were the other 7 languages?
Oh no, I knew that was going to be asked. Someone was helping me in the beginning. So Polish, Russian, French, English, German, Swedish, Finnish.
Latin?
He counts Latin. I know Latin is not spoken. What's the other one? Czech. I think it's Czech. Someone said Norwegian, so maybe if you don't count Latin, that's how we get 9. Okay. Any other questions? Yes?
How did your grandma and grandpa meet?
How did they meet? So, my grandfather, so this was in 1945, after the war, when he moved to that coastal town of Darłowo. And he had a priest friend, and he went to the opera with this priest friend. And my grandmother was at the opera with her, I think, best friend Danka. And I think at intermission, he went up to her and struck up a conversation and said he would get in touch with her, and she didn't believe it, and he did. And he showed up at her doorstep with flowers, which he said in 1945 Poland, it was impossible to get flowers. So she was so impressed by that. And for their whole, 50-plus year marriage, he brought her flowers on a regular basis. So that was a continuing theme in their marriage. Yeah, great question. Any other questions?
What happened to the younger brother?
Oh, good question too. Antoni died a few years ago. He became a famous artist in Poland, I'm proud to say. My house is covered in his paintings. Yes, because from a young age, he was selling those painted postcards, and he would go into he would find a dump site for a ceramic company where they had these molds. I forget what they're called, but he would make things out of them. So from a very young age, he was good at that. My grandfather visited him in Poland multiple times, but Antoni only came here once because he didn't speak English and didn't feel comfortable traveling. But I did get to meet him twice. Yes.
Did your grandfather ever talk about a trip in the coffin?
Oh, my grandmother? You mean when she was in there? No, I can't imagine. About tripping?
Did you talk about her travel in the coffin?
Oh, what it was like? Yeah. She said it was terrible. My grandfather and the other sailors would come up to the coffin and check on her, and they would say, do you want to get out and go to use the bathroom or take a walk or something? And she said, over my dead body. Because and she says that on the recording that I have, because there was only one female on the ship, and it was the cook. And the captain told this female cook, you check to see if there are any stowaways, especially females. And so my grandmother was absolutely terrified of being discovered. So she did not want to move.
That was from Poland to Sweden?
Poland to Sweden, yes.
How long the trip roughly?
I think hours, yeah, in a matter of hours. I'm not sure how many hours. I think it seemed a lot longer. Any other questions? Yes?
What's your personal favorite memory of your grandfather?
Oh, just how kind he was in the way that he gave me the gift of time. When I would visit, he just rearranged his whole life around me and just wake up in the morning, Stefanie, what do you want to do today? And he was just, whatever I wanted to do that day. So probably just giving me the gift of spending time with him, I think, was my favorite. Yes?
When he started systematically writing his memoirs, was it in Polish or in English?
That's interesting. In English, he had a manual typewriter, and I have the original pages, and also some handwritten pages. They're in English because I think he knew that I was going to help him put it into a computerized form. That was in the 1990s.
Stefanie, Tadeusz fought in the Polish underground during the war. Is there any mention in the book about that in his memoirs and stuff? 'Cause that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, a little bit, not too much. He didn't write too much about it. He didn't. Maybe there are people in this room that could tell us more about it that he told them. I know that after the war, my grandmother and her mother were going through the cupboards in his kitchen in that beautiful home I showed you, and they found rifles and grenades.
Yeah,
from
that's
his-
a British 303. That's what he used.
Okay.
Yeah.
He did not give me a lot of details on that for me to put in the book. What was the other mention? He said that they mounted some hit and run raids, but most of all, they were just trying to stay alive.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much for coming today. Thank you.